Okay.
Good evening. This is the Eureka Springs Parks and Recreation Commission workshop for Tuesday, May 4th, 2021. This is not a voting meeting. We will take roll just to record who's here,
Okay.
but we don't need a quorum.
Wait, did you say we're doing it or not?
Yes, let's do it. Let's go ahead and
Sure. Scott Miskell, interim director, Sue Hubbard, Ruth Hager, Kevin Ruley,
Here.
Harmon Burden, and Dave Hartman are present.
Okay, relatively short agenda tonight. Sue had commented at the last meeting, I think, that there were some of the rules that she had questions of. She wanted to work with Scott and look at possible amendments to them. So if you guys would like to go through them one by one and explain what the changes were, what the concerns were.
There you go. I would also like to just thank David Renko for coming tonight. I know that we'll be discussing some of these rules that have to do with grounds and such, and so we're all aware that he's out there. If we have any particular questions that he might elaborate on, he is here with us today. And thank you, Dave, and thank you for all the work you and your crews have been doing. The rule changes that have been proposed are relatively simple, and I just outlined them here and put them in red. The first one is real simple and easy, 211.16. We just added some language that makes it clear that fishing by lawful means with a license is allowed at Lake Leatherwood and Black Bass Lake. Sue was correct in that the way it was written would technically prohibit even fishing, so we did go ahead and propose that change.
Okay.
Then 211.14B talked about prohibiting commercial and heavy laden vehicles, and that became a matter of definitions. How do you really define what that means, et cetera? And after trying to come up with definitions, I felt, and I think Sue agreed that it would be best to remove it and then just renumber the two following paragraphs. And by the way, I'm just going to breeze through these real quick, so if anyone has a question.
Let me ask a question. Does the State Department of Highways have any weight definition depending on road classification?
I don't know. That I could check on, but
Okay.
it wasn't just the definition. It was things like, well, for instance, today we had somebody making a delivery that would have been considered a heavily laden vehicle, and then I thought, well, we could include language that says except as invited
Right.
or what have you. It's certainly something that is up for discussion, but it became difficult to come up with some language that wouldn't be overly verbose, that would accomplish what we were hoping to accomplish. I mean, large RV pulling a vehicle behind it, would that be included? We need to decide, do we want limitations on weight? And if so, then it could be some pretty lengthy drafting to define what that really means.
Yeah, it may be limitations on size, because if somebody pulls a 40-foot semi-trailer down into the parks area, he's going to have a hard time getting out.
Right. And keep in mind, the language that I put is just suggestions.
Yeah.
So
I would say rather than renumbering, just take that one and leave the number there. And if we come up with an acceptable definition that limits vehicles that we think will be a problem, then we can do that. We don't have to renumber yet again.
I'll just put reserved.
Yeah.
Okay. 211.6 on glass containers. Very good comments there, that there are people that would bring in glass containers in their RVs or even in a cooler, and do we really want to prohibit that? So I changed that to just apply to not bringing glass containers into the bathhouse, marina, or bait shop at Lake Leatherwood City Park, or within 100 feet of the shoreline of Lake Leatherwood or Black Bass Lake. 211.21 was just about walking, standing, or sitting on borders or flower beds, etc. No rule change was proposed, but it was just a matter of
Yeah, Scott, if I could comment
Oh,
on
yes,
this.
please.
So what I'm going to say now applies to a few of these that I commented on. And that is, it's no good having a rule that's just sitting on a piece of paper that no one sees.
Right.
And it's a kind of multi-step, the first next step is education, having parks employees talk to people, signage. But that also needs to be set up that if it does get to be a serious case, that law enforcement can come in and follow up.
Right.
And I don't know if the police here are the same, but I worked with law enforcement who had a number of times taken things to court and they got thrown out because they wasn't adequate, even though there was a rule or regulation, there wasn't adequate signage.
Right.
So it's just, if we're going to have these rules, what is the steps? Are we going to really enforce them? And it may be an issue for Scott, but I just want to make sure that we're not just going to put things that are on paper, because if things are here and people aren't following the rules, we don't look good. It doesn't encourage people to follow other rules.
So I will say that we have initiated kind of a first phase of signage in the parks. In fact, Dave showed Scott and I a proof of the sign that will go into Basin Park that articulates the rules that are specifically applicable to Basin Park, that will then give us the ability to have the police enforce those rules. So just to your point, they are not posted anywhere in the park, but we felt like we needed to get everything down on paper in general.
I agree.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure there is that intent. Yeah.
It's going to take a little while. I think the plan is to get everything posted. Dave is working with, Dave, could you come up and just take one of the seats so that you can make it a little bit easier to answer the questions. So Dave has been inquiring with the group that he can give a little better explanation of it that will help us communicate in a manner that's consistent with other parks and other locations, specifically as it has to do with behaviors in the park itself. And so,
Getting the feed through this?
what's that?
I'm not hearing the feed through this monitor.
Well, you're not talking in the mic. You can't hear me talking?
Hear you a lot better out there.
Oh. Okay, so if you want, you were actually telling us about this today, the group that you were working with, the Leave No Trace.
Yes, there's several different, phases to signing. The first one I've worked on the hardest has been the roadside signs that conform with the manual for I had this memorized the other day, or for a while, the manual for uniform control traffic devices, which are all your roadside signs you typically see. Now, that's been the first phase of implementation of most of the signing efforts. The second phase is a more scaled down and color palette appropriate collection of signs that for inter-administrative facility design, similar to the ones you see in Harmon Park, dictating people the one way, just a set of smaller signs that convey similar type of information, maybe with a little bit more softer please and thank you, but still fairly institutional in some aspects. And then the third phase, which is more of the interpretive programming signs that can be very colorful, very thorough, very well thought out, and much more informative on a regular basis. We just had a phone conference with Leave No Trace Ethics Program, which is centered in Boulder. And they have a new tourism partnership program that focuses directly on the need for messaging and communication and education and understanding of the needs for conservation and preservation of our public lands, especially since the event of COVID has created this incredible impact all across the nation of accelerated recreational use.
Right.
So I was really excited to have that conversation with him, and they have some great programs they've instituted in some other cities. We're going to take a look at some of those and see how we might incorporate that into a comprehensive conservation, preservation, just very land stewardship type of effort for those type of interpretive signs.
I might suggest that as we move forward with this, and I don't know if you've had a chance to meet Sue yet or not,
Yes, we met at
Yes, we
Black
have.
Rock,
but I think the two of you could work well on this together, and we would certainly take any input
yeah.
that you
I
that
mean,
you have on.
I'm happy if Dave needs help. I don't really need to, as long as someone is handling it, that's fine. with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Scott, you want to go ahead?
Let's see. So the next one, to 11.22, this was prohibiting removing flowers, shrub, vines, trees, et cetera, without the permission of the director.
Yeah, and
sorry,
I think I brought it up. It wasn't actually I objected to this. I more had questions. I lived in Eureka for 2 years and didn't know about this, so I didn't know if it was a new rule, if it was something that had been enforced, and I just never heard about it.
Right.
Just kind of curious what the origins of it were.
And I would say it's always been at least an unwritten rule. I mean, since my first day in parks, I heard that, if you see people out picking things or picking flowers or whatever, politely encourage them not to. So it's at least, again, this is why we imposed written rules, so there was no question. I personally like to forage. It's a hobby of mine. So as somebody who does that, who likes to mushroom and all that, I would love to have access to the park to do that. But given the sheer quantities of people that we have come in, and I think Mr. Renko would probably attest that that sort of activity tends to create the, what do you call it, the social trails, where people veer off the regular trails.
Yeah.
And so those are our concerns. So the question is, do we want to allow foraging or just totally disallow it, or possibly some sort of a hybrid of those two and allow it through group activities, for instance, if a master naturalist group wants to go out and, or maybe we allow permits or something. So
Yeah.
it's
Permits, yeah.
definitely something for discussion.
Yeah, I think with having a rule around it forces a discussion before anything happens, and I think that's the first step in at least being able to manage it, and we can over time figure out what the proper way is to either restate it or find, acceptable activities that may take place
Right.
around it.
Yeah. So the one thing is, we had the first one, we discussed, which is the molestation of animals, and then we have
Right.
this one, which is removing plants. I couldn't find anything in here that actually mentioned fungus. So as far as I'm concerned, everything else is banned except for mushroom hunting.
And in my comments here, I did
Yeah.
add that if the rule remains, that it is suggested that we apply fungi to that as well. And also, you had mentioned the collection of
Well,
firewood.
I had mentioned firewood, and I wasn't actually thinking it, because I think it's covered in that rule, but I just said it may be something we want to put up around the campsite, so just people can see, just to reiterate, but it would fall under this,
Right.
that rule as it already exists.
Might be something for you to weigh in on,
As far as,
allowing campers to collect
No,
firewood.
not
No,
allowing
not
campers.
allowing it, yeah.
Oh, it's just putting a
Right,
sign.
right, I mean,
Just reiterating, putting a sign there. I don't know if it's an issue, but I know a lot of areas, people will go out and just collect firewood from the area around the campgrounds.
discourage any type of cutting of firewood.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had just suggested maybe if it is a problem, maybe have a sign there, but it's not I don't think it needs a separate rule for it.
I guess we're saying
Or address it
the
in the-
implication is we'd rather see a sign than a rule?
Well, no, I think, because it says you can't cut trees or remove any vegetation, so I think we have a rule. I was just wondering if, rather than have a sign that's generic, just to say to campers, don't collect firewood. It was just a suggestion, you don't have to do it. It just came up in my
We can look at,
it
the
just
way,
came up in my discussion with
the Reserve America, I mean, we have, when they when reservations are made for campsites, doesn't it give certain rules that they have to comply with?
Yes, and we can customize those
Okay.
things as
Yeah,
well.
that would work.
That would be a good way to communicate it.
Okay.
I think that specific rule signs should be very conservatively developed and placed. They, because we can certainly have a rule sign for everything and anything, anywhere.
Right, okay, yeah. If it hasn't been a problem, that's probably fine. I've been in campsites and not here, but other places, and just seen people walking all through everywhere, picking up any bit of wood, cutting trees.
Where they're dragging a big old log over to the
Yeah.
campfire
They-
and throwing it on.
You guys are aware that we do provide
Yeah,
Yes,
firewood for sale, of course.
yeah. But that hasn't always stopped people in the places I've been at.
Right.
okay.
Yeah. But if it's not a problem, then we don't need to address it. So, and it would be covered by that rule as Scott has it written.
211.27D is a no-brainer. It was just, rather than talking about a certified guide dog, the proper term is actually service animal. So that one shouldn't take too much discussion. 211.28 was prohibiting smoking in most of the parks. It was suggested that perhaps smoking should be allowed in the pocket parks.
Well, actually, it was the same comment I was making before. It either needs to be allowed or it needs not to be allowed and signed. So
Yeah.
either one is fine.
I was under the understanding that smoking has always been banned in the parks, both the spring reservations, spring gardens, and out at Leatherwood and Black Bass.
And me as well, but it was
Yeah, but
suggested that we can consider it.
that wouldn't be so obvious to a visitor who just happens to be walking up
Right.
Spring Street and stops at a park.
And there's always been a little confusion as to
Yeah.
Yep.
if you're sitting at your own campfire smoking whatever you want to smoke or feel like you're allowed to smoke, you've leased the space. People need to understand that we're talking about they can't then walk with that smoking thing through the rest of the property, down to the marina or whatever. I think that the law does allow for people to smoke in their own car or whatever if they're in the park, or smoke at the fireplace or the fire circle at the camp spot. Sorry, I'm on the microphone. At the spot that they've reserved. Isn't that true, I would think?
As I'm looking at it, I didn't include Lake Leatherwood or Basin Park. It was, Black Bass Lake. It was Basin Spring, Sweet Spring. Well, they're all listed there. I don't have to go through them. So obviously, somebody camping at Lake Leatherwood doesn't come within the purview of this. It's really just the close-in parks, and of course, we could change that as well.
Well, I will tell you, a lot of people find it offensive to be hiking on the trails in Leatherwood and come upon a big group of people that are all smoking. I
Right.
mean, that's not why you go hiking,
Right.
at least not why most people go hiking. I would suggest that maybe this is a topic that you guys can discuss in your meeting with the other parks directors in Fayetteville next week. Is it next
Yeah.
week or this week?
This week.
Is it this week? Okay.
I'm going to be candid and ask, are we talking about just tobacco products, or are we also talking about medical marijuana use? What is the extent of,
Yeah,
this
smoking is smoking.
consideration?
Smoking is-
What's
Smoking is
plain?
smoking. We're not trying to, it's not a matter of regulating someone's behavior, it's a matter of making sure that it's a good experience for everybody. So I would suggest having the conversation. Let's see where the other parks in
Yeah,
Northwest.
see how the other parks word it, because it is something people do and expect to be able to do at their campsite.
211.29 is just release of animals prohibited. Initially, I focused just on snakes and reptiles, and just made it simple and said the release of any animals within the parks is prohibited.
Right.
And then lastly, 212.2 was just talking about not being within the parks during during off hours. And we just added except in a properly reserved and paid for campsite or cabin. I think I thought that was implied, but it certainly doesn't hurt to be
Right.
specific.
And
I would say that one
go ahead, David.
consideration that is always brought up is for mountain bikers who, I think this is a minority. I think some hikers hike at night. I don't know that many, but there are some people who like to enjoy mountain biking at night, and it might be the only time they have to ride is at night. So that might be I don't know exactly how we'd like to address that. Is it by permit? Do we just turn our head and assume the people who are out there at night are out there at night and they fend for themselves? But are they breaking the rules?
Based on this rule, they would be breaking the rules.
Are we taking a hard stance then? There's no night riding on any of our trails and public land?
Unless, do you mean someone who's already camping or camping there, then is riding at night while they're in the park? That's different, right? If someone has a campsite and then they're hiking and camping, that doesn't apply, I would assume. You can still go on the trails at night if you're already in there.
Well, the proposed change that I wrote was except in a properly reserved and paid-for campsite or cabin, so that wouldn't
Oh, you're right.
indicate that they could just be in the trails. It's probably not a good idea for anyone even to be hiking at night, for that matter, but the point is, all this prohibits is people who aren't camping or have a cabin from being in the parks when they're closed.
So if you are camping at the park, you do have the latitude to hike and bike at night, but if you're not, or if you don't have a campsite or a cabin reservation, you may not.
You know, and perhaps the wording of it needs to be rethought. The whole idea is that we do not have any staff at night in the parks.
Right.
And so we need to limit the people, and we've come across it. There was the guy that was sleeping in his car down at Black Bass Lake
Yes.
for an indefinite period of time. We need to have a way to control people going into the parks at night, and we don't have staff there to monitor it.
I would suggest that maybe we make some type of accommodation for organized and permitted group rides, not individuals, but a group ride that is, let's say if a local mountain bike club wanted to take a night ride at Lake Leatherwood, if it was scheduled and documented or permitted by the director, at least so we know that there's a group out there that might be a consideration.
We can certainly consider things.
Yeah, well, it says written permission of the director. Well, the Frog Watch people, they go out at night when the frogs are there. It's late when they're there. They're hiking, they're not biking, but there are groups that go out there, and they just have to let somebody know if they're going to be out there, what you're
Right.
saying.
And it's a prudent thing, so if somebody does go out late at night, we know who's out there and how many, and possibly a point of contact, et cetera, so.
Yeah, and I just want to confirm, it says operating hours. Are we assuming that places like Basin Park and the Springs, there's no operating hours, so it doesn't apply? Or-
There currently aren't any posted operating hours.
Yeah. This is primarily the two,
Yeah.
the Black Bass and Leatherwood.
Okay, yeah, so then maybe it should say that then.
Yeah.
The only other thing is to rule changes, is that I did provide you with a copy of an email from Edward Robinson about some rule changes that he'd like to see related to the use of drones within the parks. And he and I have had a few discussions, and he was out of town, so I was going to meet with him and see about proposing, although he has some pretty specific language there citing FAA rules. We'll see if we can consolidate it before the next meeting, and if the commission considers a change, we'll have something a little more specific to consider.
Yeah. If I can just say a little bit more before we move on. So we have banned all touching animals and plants, and there is exception with the director, but I would hope we would really encourage research. And it should be with the approval of the director, but I would like something in there just to say that is something that I would like to consider. So, because otherwise, if people read all these no's, they may think it's not even worth asking.
Yeah, well, and I think that was what, the intent when we wrote it originally, and there was a typo in the section about remote control, the model rockets, remote controlled aircraft and drones that allowed bona fide drone operators to do it with written permission of the director. That was the whole intent, was to keep the amateurs out of there, keep people from just showing up and flying a drone around over the lake, because people don't go to the park.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I said research. So
Right.
this would be scientific research of people
Oh,
coming in and doing kind of experiments. And as I say, the rules do say exception of the director, but I would just like to say something about research so it doesn't sound like we're really discouraging it.
right, oh, okay.
And are you talking about in the drone rule or?
No,
No,
in
no,
the plants and?
the plants and the animals, there's the two of them. And I think one says exception of the director, and I think the other one doesn't even say that. But if it could just say including research, or just something so that it makes it sound like we're amenable to requests.
Okay.
Yeah.
And-
The other thing, I don't know this needs to be in here, but it did just occur to me there's nothing about trash, and I just wanted to bring that up to make sure that was considered.
Actually, I was rather certain that there was.
Well, I didn't find anything.
Okay.
I'm happy to be proven wrong, though.
Okay. I will, it'll be easier for me, rather than do it here, I'll do a search
Yeah.
and replace on the digital file.
Yeah. Okay. And then I also had a conversation with Scott. There's two different clauses. One is on solicitation and one is on handbills. And I found it confusing. And when Scott explained it to me, I'm clear he has two different ideas and they make total sense. But if I'm kind of thinking if I find it confusing, someone else may do. And I think, Scott, you had said the handbills one relates to commercial.
Right.
And I think if you just had the word commercial in there and the other one says free speech, then I would understand. I forget which numbers.
And I'm looking for that here.
They're separate parts, so they're not, it's... the handbill is 211.20.
Yeah.
Yes. And what that is, let's get there, 211.20. That is more like the commercial,
Yeah.
somebody handing out flyers, that type of thing.
Yeah, I think if you just define handbills a little more and say commercial, I think that would make perfect sense to me.
211.20. Here we go. No person or bill distributor shall hand out or impose upon any park patron a handbill without the consent of such park patron, nor shall any bill distributor thereby encroach upon the use and enjoyment of the parks by others, etc. Can't
Yeah.
place handbills on vehicles parked in any park.
And the solicitation one is about freedom of speech, so it's actually saying you can do that. And that's what I found confusing. So I think it just needs a little more, I understand the intent, it just needs a little more
Yeah,
clarification.
the handbills are a problem. I will tell you, when we did the race in the park, there would be local businesses that would come stick it
Oh,
in
yeah,
everybody's windshield wiper, and everybody would come up and pull it out and throw it on the ground, and we would spend an hour and a half having to pick up trash off the
Yeah,
ground.
no, I totally understand the intent. I just want to make sure it's clear so people.
Right, and for what it's worth, on 223.2, this is a savings clause for constitutionality that just states that if anyone is doing this in the exercise of their constitutional rights of free speech and free exercise of religion, such activities will be protected in accordance with the rules and regulations provided herein. That places, cities, local governments have been sued for enforcing such things when people are passing out flyers that are not just commercial in nature. They have a right, or let's say an enhanced right, when it's not a commercial document or commercial idea. So it's a savings clause that just says that, okay, if this is a bona fide exercise of your constitutional rights, then we're not going to stop you. It's really there more than anything to protect us that, yeah, we're not intending to infringe on anyone's constitutional rights. And as has just been mentioned, we could, in that first 211.20, we could specifically say commercial. My only concern with that is it can, that's pretty broad.
Yeah.
So I like the way it's written as it is, but if there's confusion, obviously we need to clarify it.
Well, I'd have thought just saying handballs would have been even broader.
Well, with the word commercial, you also leave out something, I don't know, trying to think. Yeah, I've been out there when I've seen things on people's windshields, and I don't know, would you just have to be careful what you're, if you want to include everybody, is it free speech to put, I don't know, I can't think of any examples right now, but I think, yeah, I don't think you need the word commercial. But I don't know, you're the lawyer. I feel like it's, you'd limit yourself by saying that, is what I'm trying to say, I guess.
I don't know, I just read it and it's like, and I got to the solicitation, I'd already read the handbills, and I kind of, what's that? Didn't I just read the opposite of that? And I went back and it just wasn't clear to me. And Scott explained it and it made perfect sense of the intent, but I just want to make sure that, because if I say you can't put handbills, and I was about to do something about free speech, I would think, oh, they're telling me I can't put handbills. And I may not get to several pages later on where it talks about solicitation.
Yeah, it could be that those just need to be sequential,
Yeah, that would definitely help.
rather than pages apart,
That would help.
or part of the same section.
Okay, I'll perhaps just combine them into one.
Okay.
Make a note of that. And then I think we're done with the rules, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so, okay, I'll combine those, and before our next meeting, I'll do a new set of proposed changes with the few changes we discussed tonight.
Yeah, and if we can get them out and highlight the changes to everybody before the meeting, then we should be able to vote on them.
I certainly will.
Okay. Number 2, discuss hiring a consultant to assess trees in the pocket parks.
This, I've actually mentioned a time or two in some recent meetings, and including the one where we had a tree planting service last week. Because we are a tree city, and because trees are so important regardless of whether we're a tree city, and for a multitude of other reasons, we should be cautious about cutting trees. As we know from some recent assessments of our parks, we do have situations where large trees are creating damage, either because they're dying and subject to falling, or their roots are causing damage to walls, etc. So I would like to consider hiring, and I say a consultant, the logical choice to me is Chris Fisher, and it's a small enough dollar amount that we don't need to go to open bid, but to me, Chris Fisher is the one that I'm aware of that has the most knowledge as to these things. He has indicated that he would do it for $25 an hour. I asked him for a sort of a cap or do not exceed, and he said he thought $1,000 would be a good number for him to be able to complete the job. Obviously, if it ends up being more detailed than is needed, we could come back and request to bump that cap up, but he seemed pretty confident that that would be a good amount. And I'm looking, among other things, to have a zoning of sorts, zones within, areas within building or near buildings or near walls maybe are limited to certain types of plants or smaller trees, shrubs, etc. And then areas that are further back, then more or less anything goes unless it's invasive. So at the next regular meeting, I will be requesting approval of this. In a sense, it's already in our budget. I should say that I had put $1,000 for assessing for hiring an arborist to assess the black gum tree in Basin Park. And it turned out that the 3 companies that I called and spoke with, none of them charged us anything for this. So in reality, it fits the same bill and much more. So I think it's revenue neutral in the sense that we're still assessing trees. It's just more than the one that I had hoped to have assessed for that amount. So I don't know if we need any questions. We've
And
sort of,
does this include all of the spring garden reservations, or are we just limiting it to specific ones?
we talked about, well, it could be as big or as large as we wanted. So
Okay.
trying to recall now.
I mean, obviously, we know that the ones that around Spring Street, so down Main
Yes.
Street and around Spring Street,
Yes.
have walls that are being compromised in places. I think that anywhere where part of the built infrastructure is being compromised in a way that ultimately even the tree won't survive because it's growing
Yes.
on the edge of something that's being retained by a stone retaining wall, and as soon as the retaining wall goes, the soil that's being retained is going to come along behind
Yes.
it, which includes the tree. And I
Yes.
think actually in the last storm, the tree came down on the old log cabin that's part of the museum
Yeah,
on
the Cora Pinkley cabin.
Yeah.
Main Street. So,
Sorry, it fell on the Cora Pinkley cabin. That tree did fall on
yeah,
Spring Street a couple days ago.
Okay. I will say this as well, is that I mentioned this in one of the department head meetings, and it was definitely suggested that to assess the types of tree cutting that we're talking about, they would definitely have a greater comfort level to have a consultant of some sort do something like this for us. So, we do comply with the rules and regulations related
Yeah.
to cutting trees, and so this will facilitate that. And I think also give the public the realization that we're not out there just indiscriminately cutting trees. It's going to be well thought out, and this will be something that will be bettering the parks, not detracting from them.
okay. So I think bring a written proposal for it at
Yes.
the meeting in 2 weeks, and we'll put it on the agenda to vote on.
I will do that. And we're ready to move on?
Yep.
Okay, finally, discussing the requirements of the Trails Coordinator writing the trails a minimum of once per week, and that for safety reasons, the policy is that he cannot do so alone. That's something that we certainly don't need commission approval on. It's a safety matter. We do, and Mr. Renko is, don't mean to speak for you, but I know for a fact, because we've discussed it, is fully behind the policy that we don't ride, we don't want our people, we don't want anyone riding the downhill trails alone. We do have our trails coordinator at least once a week ride each of the downhill trails, and it usually can't be done with an employee. So I just am bringing this, stating it here in public, that this is with my authorization, unless somebody says otherwise, is that for safety reasons, really any employee that needs to ride the downhill trails will not do so alone, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an employee. And because somebody would be riding the shuttles without a paid-for pass, I want to make sure that this is
Right.
out in the open, and that it's not something that we're doing without a valid reason.
Yeah.
Safety is always a compelling reason in everything we do. And so it's not so much something that I'm asking action on unless the commission feels it's necessary. It's reporting to you that this is something that I'm authorizing, even though it would mean that an employee and possibly a non-employee will be on occasion riding our shuttles without the requirement of paying for it.
So I think, as we get further into the season and we start operating more days during the week, I think the biggest issue is that the majority of riders that we have on the shuttles are on the weekends, and we can't expect our trails coordinator to work on the weekends in order to inspect the trails, which he would be able to ride with other riders then. He wouldn't have to bring somebody with him.
Yes, yes.
During the week, it is prudent that there be someone with him. He can certainly cover more ground and cover more of the trails in a shorter period of time on a bike than he can on foot.
Yes.
But you're right, I think as an employee, we need to ensure that it is done as safely as possible.
Right. And in my view, the fact that friend or, some third party is willing to go along, it's worth not having revenue from one shuttle pass to allow that. So, it's not something that, is going to happen day in and day out. This is, this would be once a week or so. And,
Right.
Technically, that person would be a volunteer helping out at the
Absolutely.
time, so.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is there a sign up for volunteers? Do they sign some kind of waiver? Or
A year and a half ago, I prepared documents related to a volunteer program where people do sign an application, provide us basic information, and among other things, there are waivers. We haven't had a whole lot of volunteers in the last year, so the few that we've had, I frankly don't know if personnel have been reminded that we have those forms, and I will make sure that our staff is aware that when we have volunteers, those forms should be signed.
yeah, especially if they're riding downhill on
Oh,
Aberystwyth. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I think anybody that's an employee or a volunteer that's doing something for our benefit, then a free shuttle was necessary. I don't think that
Right.
would be an issue at all.
Again, I want to make sure it's out in the open.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any, it's publicly stated, there's no objection to it. I don't think there's any reason to wait 2 weeks and put it to a vote.
Okay. Thank you.
This harkens to at least us then consider, are we going to shuttle individual downhill riders that have come to just ride the shuttle on their own? If we're not willing to let one of our own people ride alone, are we going to promote shuttling individual riders?
We're not operating the shuttles when there's only one rider. I mean, that's the reason why we're not operating during most weekdays, is that we're not going to operate a shuttle if there's only one rider.
No, I mean single riders at all. Like, can you walk up and say, I want to ride the DH trails. I'm here by myself. I'm paying my fee, and here I go. So if you're with the group or not, because not everybody goes up and rides with the group. So if you're a solo rider, you may choose to go ride. Everybody that's on the shuttle may be riding a series of lines, and one guy may decide to go and ride. He's a solo rider. He's come to ride solo, and we're casting. I'm just. Your brain's
That's
just-
inserting ourselves in something that we don't need to get into. That's going to be, one, there's not going to be any way to manage that. Two, if somebody chooses to go ride a line by themselves, that's entirely their choice. They have signed a waiver. There's only so much responsibility we should even attempt to take around that sort of thing. Now, I thought your question was, would we run the shuttle for a single rider? And absolutely not. So, I don't know how you manage that, Dave. I don't know why.
I wouldn't either. I'm just, saying that we're setting a precedent for the care and consideration of our own employees, but we're not extending that. I'm just playing devil's advocate here with this a little bit.
I think it's a completely different circumstance. We are ensuring that if an accident occurs to an employee who is on the job, that there will be someone there to give aid or to go get help. I think we cannot expect an employee to take a risk, and anytime you ride down one of those downhill trails, there is some risk involved to it. So this is just simply prudence on our part with employees, but we're not going to dictate to individual riders how they choose to ride, any more than we would on any of the rest of the trails. I mean, frankly, if someone wants to go around, ride the far side of the Beecham Trail coming out of the quarry, I mean, frankly, that's, in a lot of conditions, there's more risk involved in that than on any of the downhill trails, so.
And that's all I had.
Okay?
Okay.
Anyone else have anything?
Nope.
All right, I think that's a wrap.
I think so.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.